Welcome back to the channel of truth, trust, and transparency. Today, I'm putting together and answering one of your questions. Before I do that, let me give you guys, I know there's 3 people that are wondering where we're at with this, so I'm going to update it for you guys. 312 subscribers to go before the end of the year. Hopefully, if you haven't subbed yet, sub so we can hit 2,500 by the end of the year. I've been posting every day because of it. Now, question comes in from Jerry. Jerry says, hey, been watching your YouTube every day and subs, of course. I have a view question about properties in insert specific region. Now, I'm not going to tip everyone off as to where Jerry is buying, but I will answer his question because it is relative to definitely a few things. Now, I have seen 3-bedroom properties have a big range from mid 450s all the way to 550s. Can you dive into any characteristics where it could make a big price difference? Jerry, it's a great question. The reason is because there are so many different things that come into consideration when we are looking at comparables, comparing comparables. I think a lot of buyer's agents get this wrong, don't understand it. And I think, it's always said that, and it is in every single video where they say, we bought this property for 500. There is a direct comparable down the street that just sold for 600. Our clients have $100,000 of usable equity. Why do they never show you that comp down the street? And as I said in my previous video a couple of days ago, it might have even been yesterday, is because that property either doesn't exist or there's something that they're not telling you about that property. So I'm gonna break it down. Now, by no means, Jerry or anyone watching, is this everything you need to consider. It's not gonna be a fully exhaustive list. However, I'm gonna give you the ones to start off with because I try to keep these videos short and sharp. We're going to break it up into 2 different elements. So one's going to be outside of the property boundary and the other is going to be inside the property. Now, the reason why this is important, and for anyone that is looking at buying an investment property, Jerry, anyone out there watching, outside your property boundary, you cannot control. Inside your property boundary too. So if there are issues as well with your property, if they are on this side, it means that no matter how much money you spend, you cannot save them. If they're on this side, they potentially can be fixed, but it just depends on how much money. So for example, if there's major structural cracks and it's gonna cost you 150 grand, it might ruin the deal. However, if it is an overgrown backyard, it could be a weekend with you and your partner, a couple of laborers and a couple of trips to the tip for $1,000. So inside your property boundary, you can control. Outside of your property boundary, you can't. That's very important to note too, as well as the valuation of things. Now, by no means is this going to be an exhaustive list, but I'm going to name a good dozen plus each so that you can start to get your head around it. So the first is going to be road and street. This includes things like, is there roundabouts? Is there roundabouts? Speed of the road, speed of roundabouts. So for example, if a house is right on a roundabout compared to not, that will be a comparison there will be a difference in value between those 2 properties. Speed of the road at the front of the house. If it's 80 k's at the front of the house on this particular block, compared to a house in another street that's 50, well then there's going to be a discrepancy because houses that have high speed out the front are not as advantageous compared to ones with lower speeds. That also goes for how many lanes. How many lanes? If it's 3 lanes each way out the front, it's a highway, it's an arterial road. If it's one lane each way, it's going to also have an impact on the road. Just think, 2 of them side by side. That's what you're always doing, comparing. Is one property, if they're identical properties and one is on a road with 3 lanes out the front each way, a major highway, or one is just a normal suburban street, is there going to be discrepancy in price? Of course. Also things like bus stops. Ideally we don't want a property that is in or near or has a bus stop out the front. If there is one, that can be a deterrent and decrease the price. The next is going to be your neighbors. So that includes immediate neighbors, includes what's on the street. Ideally, we're not looking for streets that have a childcare center, a school, a really big shopping center or anything like that, where there is going to be a massive ingress of cars. So when I do my overlays and when I do my deal reviews, I'm always in there looking to see how the traffic circulates. If there is a school, if there's a childcare or anything like that, obviously we're going to run into some issues. Again, that could be a deterrent compared to a nice, quiet pocket end-or street where there is none of that on it. That also includes anything unusual. What can that look like? Cemetery, commercial, all those sorts of things. Think if the neighbors are anything that is unusual, you likely mean it is either a detractor or a value add comparing it to another block. We also want to have a look at, and as you guys have seen, is the public housing. General rule of thumb is we want to keep this less than about 15%. I've done videos on how we can check and how we can look at that. So obviously if we're in a high public housing pocket, it could act as a risk or a deterrent for future purchases, for future buyers, for future renters. So that's one thing to check, and you're never going to be able to tell just by being on Google Maps. So that's something that you need to look at the maps and the overlays for. We also, and I'm going to go off neighbors, also on streets, is things like train stations, train tracks and or stations. Proximity to this, pretty common sense. Same with big substations. So if you're comparing two houses, for example, side by side next door to two houses, exactly the same on the street, is there any of those big deterrents? Is there any of those things that is, I just look for something that is unusual or not just a typical house on a block. If there is a childcare or if there's a substation out the front, something that is unusual and or different, identify it. Okay, is it an increase in value or is it a decrease in value? Perfect, and then that will help deter. Now, there's no rule of thumb to say if it is on extent minus 5,000, but you just need to take that in consideration when making an offer. Couple more things outside the property boundary that we need to think about is also the zoning. So that includes current and future. So I give you the best example for zoning is going to be Rose Bay in New South Wales. It's in the eastern suburbs. In Rose Bay, the LMR housing has went wild, the LMR rezoning, and it has meant properties worth anywhere between 6, 8 to 10 mil are now being grouped up with each other and sold to developers for about $15 million. Now, if you're across the zoning or you're across the future zoning, LMR, I've got some mates that optioned up a lot of those deals before they came out. If you're across that, then you're going to see disparities, because if I'm buying something in the Rose Bay, pre or imminent to that zoning, the price of that house is going to be substantially more than if I go more than 800 meters away from the local town center and I'm out of that zoning, which means that I might just get 5 or 6 mil. On paper, it could be the same 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-car. One's got the right zoning, one doesn't. So you need to also be able to check not only the current, but also the future, if there's any plans, overlays, expansions, rezoning is going to happen. Another overlay as well, zoning is also overlays. That would be bushfire, that would be flood, that would be any aircraft, anything like that. So also I use a software called Land Checker. You're welcome to go out there and use it yourself, but that you can toggle on a lot of the overlays as well. When you get your planning certificates part of your contract or get your solicitor to order them, council will tell you what overlays are affected by that particular site, so you can go through. Now, obviously, if I'm buying a house that has a bushfire overlay compared to one that doesn't, the bushfire overlay will have an insurance premium, which means people won't want to pay as much compared to if it doesn't, right? So that's what you need to have a look at and consider before we go into the property. You know, location, I'll also put at the top of that list is obviously that location and that proximity to amenities, that proximity to where we need to be in that particular suburb. For example, you know, if I'm at Bondi Beach and I'm looking at 2-bed, 1-bath, 1-car apartments, one that's a block back from the beach with no water views and the exact same layout as one that is 2Ks back from the beach is going to sell a little bit less. He's going to sell at a premium because it's the right location when we look at the proximity to where we need to be, or lifestyle precincts, those sorts of things. Obviously, we don't want to be too close depending on the area and the asset that we're buying. We don't want to be too close. For example, we don't want to be across the road from a train station. We want to be a few streets back. But there is a difference between being in walking distance to somewhere and that convenience compared to having to drive into a car. So there are some things to think about outside the property boundary. And again, none of this shit you can change no matter how much money you spend, because it is out of your control. Now, let's go to inside the property boundary, because there is still going to be a stack of stuff. So things inside the property boundary. Now, the first we're going to look at is obviously land size, size of the block, shape of the block, fall of block. What do I mean by that? Your block's one of three ways. If I cut the street in half and I look at the street, I'm going to have my street here, and then I'm going to have a house over this side and a house over this side. Now, it will either be a flat street or it will be a slope street, either way, which means one house will be either on the high side and one on the low side, or vice versa, one on the low side, one on the high side, maybe both on the low or evened out. Now, obviously, if I'm on a slope street, I want to be on the high side. High side probably has some sort of view aspect, no flooding issues, whereas the low side, think about, and a really good question to ask yourself, what happens when it rains? Because when it rains, all the water trickles down and goes into these sorts of properties, right? Which could detract in terms from evaluation. Same with the shape of the block. If I got a really nice, normal rectangular block, it's got a really good, nice 15-meter frontage. Well, that's great. But again, the cul-de-sac shaped blocks. Well, if I got a block that's like this, and I've only got this shitty ass little, 5-meter frontage, and my house is, all these weird shapes, then obviously this house is going to be worth less, right? It might be a slightly bigger block, but it's an unorthodox shape. So bank's valuation, that could hurt you potentially. Another thing as well is going to be aspect. So what way does it face? Is it north facing, south facing? All these things come into play when we're thinking about how much of value to put on this property. Big one is going to obviously be the floor plan. We're wanting to get bedrooms that are at least 3 meters by 3 meters. Often you'll see real estate agents are prone for this, and take it as my advice. Often you'll see real estate agents put up these pissy little rooms that are 2.4 meters by 2.7 meters. That is very hard to get a double or queen bed in those sorts of rooms. And if you've got more than one of those sorts of rooms, then how are you going to have a family of grown adults actually fit into there? You can't. So obviously not everyone can buy it. There's less competition, lower price. If you can, 3x3, worst case is one of these measurements is 2.7, but I typically would only take that for one bedroom, potentially depending on the asset and where and what it is you're buying. Another one to think about is frontage. Now you can't really change that, so it might be here, but it is kind of the boundary of the property, similar to shape of the block. But again, we want that nice big frontage and that sort of street appeal. Floor plan as well will also add into and link to the size under roof. You'd be amazed how many people miss this one. They go, oh, the direct comparison down the road. Brother, the house that you just bought is 90 square meters. The house up the road that you're comparing it to is 120 square meters and has a study. Totally different. One's 30% bigger than the other one, and there's so much more space under roof. So again, if it is a larger space under roof, we have really big living rooms, we have really big bedrooms. The size of that house is going to be bigger, which means it has a higher value compared to something that's a little shitty box, correct? Another thing as well is going to be extensions and conversions. Need to look out for this one. Garage conversions or any extensions. We need to make sure that they are fully approved, because if they're not, and someone looks at it and people know and they do their research, a lot of buyers agents don't, but if you do your research, then obviously something that is unapproved can be lesser value, right? If it's got some sort of garage conversion to a bedroom or a sleep out or a study or a studio or something like that, if it's not approved, it can devalue the property or be a risk, because if you buy that, council can serve you with a notice to either demolish it or go, through the works to get it approved. So extensions and conversions, one to look out for. Couple of other things: condition slash state. Pretty obvious. If the thing is run down and it looks like a crack, then going to be less than something that's nice. I'm going to say fixtures plus finishes. What brand of appliances, what brand of finishes do we have? What brand of fixtures do we have in the house? More expensive brands or well-known brands, are higher up and ranked more compared to the lower on, compared to the cheaper brands that maybe you haven't heard of. We also add on to their features. That's things like aircon. Those are things like, for example, air conditioners, underfloor heating, ducted, those sorts of things. Some houses will have them, some houses won't. Flow will be another one. Probably comes under floor plan as well, but how does the flow of the house feel? Is it disjointed? Is there shitty walls? Is it a floor plan? Is it you need to knock walls out to be able to function? All those sorts of things. If it doesn't have a good flow, a lot of people will pick that up and be like, a bit hesitant towards it. There's also opportunity there too, because if it's flow shit and you go, I've just got to get rid of these walls and it would actually flow a lot better. Obviously, you need to get a builder and that through to double check. It's not a structural wall, but there is opportunities there too if it is a dog's breakfast for you to remake it. Another thing is obviously storage. Features as well. That can be things like solar panels, solar, AC, all those sorts of things. Even a pool. Now, again, I wouldn't advocate for a pool if we're buying investment properties. Compliance and just issues around the pool can be a really big nightmare, depending on the location too. Because if it's if it's Northern Queensland and they are almost required or highly sought after, big difference. But last but not least is obviously going to be storage. Storage within that property. Is there plenty of an abundance of storage, or is it this shitty little 90 square meter box with no linen cupboards, no built-ins, any of that kind of stuff? So look, Jerry, by no means an exhaustive list, but somewhere to start. So I started and look outside, and I'm comparing two properties side by side. I'm looking the street, their location, what is on that street, what else is on that street that can be either a deterrent or a positive, and be realistic. Is it actually being on the same road as a school isn't a positive? It is a negative in terms of you want a generally, you want a nice straight street. You're on the flat side or the higher side if possible. You want nothing different about it. You just want houses on that street, 40 to 50 Ks an hour. That is ideal. Anything that is obviously 60, 80 Ks, got the chocolate, it's going to be worth less. When we get inside the property, it's the shape. It's the land size, it's the aspect, it's the floor plan, it's the features, the frontage, size under roof. Those sorts of things start to play up. And the answer isn't going to be, land size 400 square meters and one is 405. A land per square meter is worth X. You sort of just need to put the two side by side. Where does both sit? And that's why if you look at enough comparisons, you look at enough comparables on the street, on the blah, blah, blah. And then we look at as well, probably another thing not added on here, but is going to be also suburb data. Because when we're comparing, one thing you need to be conscious with is if your comps are in January for 500 grand, right? And you're buying in December, and you're saying, I think it's worth 525. Let's have a really good look at the data. What has the data been showing for that suburb? Because if the suburbs went up 15%, then you're definitely well behind the market, 525. So you need to have a look at suburb data probably to start off with. But look, that's something by no means over exhaustive, but something to get you started. And I think if you had that behind you, you could make a better informed decision when you're comparing to. It takes 2 months plus, I reckon, 8 weeks plus to watch a market, to fully be engrossed into a market and see what things are buying, how things are selling, what they're selling for, where the pockets are, where the really good pockets are, all those sorts of things. So you're comparing and gathering as much data as possible. That's why when people rush into a market and they go, blah, 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 they haven't done the research. They haven't done the time. They haven't done the effort. They don't know the nuances of the property yet. Become that local area expert. Have that spreadsheet ready. Really good episode as well. If you go back and watch Drew on Everything Property, he's a guy that sells clothes, used clothes, and he just bought his first investment property. We helped him through the course, but he's a guy that just spreadsheet, had it out analytically, and was just so diligent with how he got through there. In the end, the benefit of that was that he was able to buy his first property, and he was just an area expert. He could tell you what the market value was, why the properties were selling. He had all the overlays on a map. So do things like that to further inform yourself. Hope this was a bit of a eye-opener, provided some value for you, and you can start to piece together those properties that have the discrepancies in sale prices. There's always going to be a buyer's agent out there as well who's willing to overpay 50 to 60 grand to get the clients off their books. That's just how they operate. You got value from this, please, if you could, hit subscribe. I'm trying to get to 2,500 subscribers by the end of 2025, and I'm this many away. And there's probably about that many of you guys that watch my videos. So if you could sub, and then we can hopefully get me towards my goal. But as usual, guys, appreciate you watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.